Welcome to episode 4 of Modern Game Podcast. This week we are going to be talking about league strength and also the amount of leagues that are now in Challenger and starting to think about what happens if any more get added. I think it's a really great time to talk about this because this weekend we've seen the return of a lot of Challenger leagues. So obviously we've had Russia and Austria for a couple of weeks. This week we've dropped in Eredivisie, Turkey, we've dropped in Portugal, and the impact that that's going to have on competition is obviously pretty major. My challenger team this week was just pretty flat, to be honest. Like I'm in a bit of a state of limbo at the moment where I, be honest, made a pretty big bet on Ito not going to die in France.
Right.
So my challenger team is looking pretty weak. Although I did roll the dice on Soleimani, who started this week and went for 60 without a decisive. So my challenger hopes are starting to look up a little, but yeah, I completely deprioritized challenger this week because one, I was worried about the level of competition, and two, I just didn't think I had the players or the fixtures to really cut it. I was a bit worried about perhaps rotation. Lo and behold, the boy Wuthrich did get rotated, so that completely killed the team anyway. So I deprioritized and I punted on Soleimani purely because I'd read in midweek that he'd sort of once again patched up his differences with Kortrijk, which seems to be a occurrence that happens every time. Absolutely. But yeah, let's get into it. Like, I know you are more active. I've really sort of pivoted into under 23s this summer, but you're more active in Challenger. Like, how are you finding it? Because I know we had a chat offline the other day where it was a bit of like, oh, Challenger rewards don't look too great. Obviously, taking Russia out, but still having them scored really has had an impact on the amount of prizes total that will be available, while still leaving in some pretty big hitting cards. So yeah, I'd just be interested to get your perspective on the sort of situation that is Challenger right now to get it started.
Yeah, I think it's a very tricky balancing act for Sorare, this, to be honest. And I think it's going to happen I think it will happen with everything at some point. We're already seeing with limited tournaments. I think McBride put his champion limited team up on Twitter last night, where he was in 8th place with like 500 points. And then the top of that division is like there's like 0.0x points in between like first, second, and third. It's like people just playing the same lineup but just having different XP and captain multipliers and stuff.
I was going to say, what I saw was crazy about that was I think there's people winning a T2 limited with like 460 points.
Yeah, it's
mad. Yeah, it's really mad. I remember there was one time I was absolutely raging because I got I think it was like 420 points and got a T2 rare where I was like dreaming of a podium. So yeah, I dread to think if you've gone clear of 400 points, you're expecting more than a T2, but to get like over 450, that's like near perfect scores. It's crazy. Like if you think about the goalkeeper, goalkeepers are rarely going to get 100, so you cannot a perfect score for me is not 550 because the goalkeeper, it would be 520, right? Wouldn't it? Because
it sort of depends what multipliers you have, but around.
But assuming there are 0 multipliers, the best base score you could get with a captain of 20% bonus would be 520.
Correct. Yeah.
So and that's assuming a goalkeeper gets 100, which is just never going to happen. So then it's 460 is that is your team has had an amazing week, and to be oh, I might get a card that's worth less than rare threshold from this is that's a kicker.
Yeah, it really is. And I don't feel like that's happened in Challenger now, but yeah, I think I tweeted the end of last week or the beginning of this game week that I thought the Challenger prize pool was light. Basically, there was 2 less star rewards than there were last week when we have 3 complete leagues back. So I don't understand how that's possible. And then basically in rare there were more prizes, but it essentially was just a longer tier 3 tail. So I think I tweeted something being the case of I think we're going to see some pretty high scores required. Having said that, we might not this week because
I stunk.
Exactly, right? Because I don't want to say that I've got the best challenger cards, but I'm not. I didn't have a DMP in any of my challenger lineups this week, and I'm not winning a reward in challenger, which feels odd. Like normally, if all my guys play, I'm coming away with at least something, right? Just because I have players that average 60 or above, essentially. But
Did
yeah,
you captain Timber? Is that
I
what
did
happened?
captain Timber. I did captain Timber, yes. So my challenger at Rare Pro got 340 points. It is currently still in the prizes, but only by 4 points, and there's 36% of the game week still have to play in challenger. So, like, and to be honest, I've said we're not going to see need huge scores because Ajax have not done particularly well, and Zenit drew 0-0 with Akmat, and Celtic conceded a goal. Zagreb were very heavily rotated. You know, I think a lot has gone against your key. You know, Bruges drew 1 each. You know, lost their clean sheet as well. Porto lost their clean sheet late. You know,
probably rotate.
yeah, right. So you know, although I've said all of this, like challenger at Rare Pro, there still is like a third of the game week to go, and you're already needing 340 to be in the prizes. So it could well be like 380 is the prize rank here. What you need for a T2, and then like 410 or above. I mean, obviously we'll see basically come the end of today what we're looking at, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was somewhere between sort of 360 and 380 for a prize, which I think, you know, like I say, isn't the end of the world, but I think it is quite concerning if we continue on this price trajectory that this is on a week where quite a few key big players haven't hit very well. Like what does that do to the scores on a week where like Ajax have Groningen at home next week? You know, I thought they'd get a clean sheet against Sparta, and obviously they conceded 2 goals. But Groningen at home, that is very favourable for a clean sheet for them. And Zenit are playing a Moscow team, and yeah, you might think like, and CSKA on fire, to be fair, but you might think that's difficult for Zenit. But the last time they played a Moscow team, they won 5-0. So, like, you know, I'm not saying that obviously we're going to see unprecedented numbers next week. I don't know what the prize pool will look like, but I do think it is slightly concerning that it already looks like on basically a poor week with everyone playing, it looks like you're needing between sort of 360 and 380 to hit a tier 2 in D3. And then in D4, what am I on? 290. So D4 looks pretty reasonable, actually. So you're still in the prizes at the minute, again, with a third of the game week to play, with like 250 points. So yeah, T3s look like they're going to be pretty easily achievable. And then, you know, tier 2s are from 130th. So it might be more like 320 for a tier 2 in D4, which again is probably fine. So yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic. I do wonder what they do with the prizes. Just because I'm not sure how many people stay engaged once all the leagues are back. If this is our prize cap in Challenger, like we're getting 60 prizes in Rare Pro. Because, you know, scores required are going to be really, really hefty, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well. When you think about the difference between Rare Pro and Rare, a lot of people put their best cards in Rare Pro.
Yeah.
So the fact that like common captain choices like Timber didn't hit the high notes this week is going to have a significant impact on score, and that's just one team. So the fact that there's been this sort of odd scenario where a couple of teams have not performed to the standard you usually expect, and they've had like outliers all in the same week, and you're still probably looking at close to 400 for a tier 2, and that's could jump to way over 400 next week if all of these players that you'd expect to hit return or regress to where they'd normally score.
Yeah, and I think maybe another reason why Challenger Rare looks like better in comparison is this is like obviously one of the first game weeks we've had without the common keeper, right? And I'm not expecting loads and loads of people to have played common keepers in Challenger Rare, though I think from the Sorare data graphs I've seen quite a few more than I expected actually did do it. But what I do expect is that people are consolidating their Challenger teams into All-Star because they maybe now only have one keeper, or so they're not getting out an All-Star team and the Challenger team. They're just getting out a Challenger team. They're just getting out an All-Star team because they want to be sure to get that ETH threshold. So yeah, I'm not sure if that also maybe has a positive impact on the prize versus entry and like prize versus entry ratio in Challenger at Rare, whereas in Challenger at Rare Pro, like that scenario doesn't apply. Like people that were running Challenger at Rare Pro lineups are still doing it, because there's essentially been no change. But yeah, just looking at like the top of the leaderboards, obviously the Portuguese teams, for the most part did very well. Benfica kept a clean sheet, and obviously Porto scored a bunch of goals. I think they scored 3 or 4 in the end. Taremi and Evan
They did
Nielsen.
concede right at the end there, I think.
Yeah,
didn't
exactly. Yeah. So they did concede, but people that have run lots of the top of the leaderboard is like Odysseus, Otamendi, Grimaldo, and then Taremi. That makes up a lot of the top of the leaderboard.
they? Yeah.
And then there's a few other lineups in there. Oh, Roxy got demolished by Odejewski's red card. Actually, he's still on over 400 points despite the red card, though. Seems mad.
And that's in Challenger.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. He played in there.
Yeah, he stacks in with Douglas Santos.
Yeah.
Which I think makes sense.
Here's the interesting thing that I look at. So if you look at the most selected players this week in Challenger Europe Rare, Morioka flopped, Douglas Santos flopped. There's a couple of people here that were real hitters. Mignolet conceded. Wendell didn't really hit the heights that you'd normally expect from him. Bergquist, again, pretty floppy score at 41. Malcolm, 59. There's only really, among the top sort of 20 most selected players, you're only really looking at Rafa of Benfica, Mehdi Taremi, Grimaldo, Tadic to an extent, but still 80 is a low score for him.
Also, only 40 managers played Tadic,
Yeah.
What's he got, 160 minutes? 147 minutes. So, he's obviously been played in All-Star or Rare Pro or, one of them.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think, again, that probably helps.
Yeah, completely.
But, yeah, you're right. The top players, if you look at the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If you look at the top 10, only 4 of them, so 40% of them have a score over 60, essentially, which seems low considering, how many of them are actually used.
Yeah.
I think that maybe again is why we've seen outlier correlation in Rare Pro where the scores are still really high. It's just because there's less supply or less super rares available, and so the ones that have still hit really hard, basically. People have still got in really competent teams and strong teams. But yeah, I do wonder. I wonder where Sorare go from here. What happens when they add more Challenger leagues as well? Because surely that is something that's going to happen. I don't know if they get Scandinavia, basically, or even the championship. Say that comes on or is fully licensed, because they're on about getting the top 20 leagues in the world, right? I'm guessing the championship is one of the top 20.
Definitely, yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting as well is I like to have a look at what do Opta cover. So the way it works at the moment with Sorare is they pay for a package for certain leagues. Some leagues are in it, some leagues are not. And that's why we've seen this sort of craziness with the Europa Conference League qualifiers recently, with people being how is Team A covered and Team B not? And it's basically the fees and what Opta choose to cover based on what leagues pay them, essentially. So you can see what leagues are paying them. And what I understand about this recent Opta coverage in the midweeks for the Conference League is essentially Belgium Pro League didn't pay Opta any extra money to cover their qualifiers. So that's why Antwerp and Anderlecht weren't covered. But then you see Hapoel Be'er-Sheva is, and you're come on, if we're covering the best teams, what's going on here? But essentially it's all tied into what leagues pay Opta, because that's how they choose to cover. Is Opta receive a fee from the leagues? They're essentially double dipping. They receive a fee from the league to cover it, and then they sell their data to third parties. But what I find interesting is if you look at it, Greece is on the list, Sweden, there's Norway as well. I think we're already in Denmark, aren't we? We've got Denmark is one licensed club.
Albert,
so Greece could be added to Challenger realistically. Norway, Sweden, that's I'm not saying that they will. I don't there's certainly nothing at the moment to suggest that they have licenses for those leagues, but just saying that in theory it is possible. And obviously, like you said as well, the championship, the championship's an interesting one, because you would end up having this scenario whereby a team would be strong for a maximum of 12 months and then gets promoted and dies.
Yeah.
So I wonder how that works as a dynamic. But you think, if they were to add Olympiacos, they were to add Greece and you get Olympiacos, like Olympiacos smash.
Good team.
You've got a couple of strong teams in Sweden. Like, it keeps on adding these outliers. And I wonder, like, at what point, like, does Challenger stay Challenger, or do at one point they have to split it? I know people have talked about the split before.
Sure.
But what I sort of, wonder, I remember there was a time, do you remember when I think it was Portugal moved ahead of France in like some ranking, and everyone's like, Portugal should go to champion. And I'm like, could you imagine what that would have suddenly done? Like, if you could then win Mbappe in Challenger, like, but if you had demoted France, like, that didn't make any sense. Like, for me, like, you keep, like, champion is the 5 leagues that champion is.
Yeah.
But then underneath, like, what happens? And what happens if they suddenly add a load more? And like you said, like, it's not just the additional countries, but it's the second leagues in where the countries already have, like the championship. Like, the championship could put some absolute hitters out. There could be some very strong players in there. And the thing with the championship, which is also really interesting, is the amount of matches they get. They're one of the biggest leagues in Europe, I think, in terms of total team size. So they're constantly playing midweek. So then suddenly, you think of the scenario last season where Feyenoord cards were super valuable because they were crushing at the weekends, they were crushing in midweek. If you pick, they license teams in the championship, and you suddenly got, like, a runaway team in the championship.
Fulham last year, basically.
Like Fulham, yeah, exactly. Like, they become like the meta. But then the thing that I've always thought about it is I was like, just add more prizes. But then more prizes than, like, that doesn't seem to be happening. Like, credit to Sorare for adding all of the additional side games, because I think there's proof that there's obviously prizes there, and the side games have been a way of giving more people the opportunity to win. The challenge I think with, like, splitting Challenger is, if you take out a league, so say for example they say, you know what, we're gonna split it, and the championship is going out into a new one, or our Challenger is now Belgium, Turkey, Russia, Netherlands, for example, or they pick, like, the top 5 ranked teams.
Yeah.
So they've got, like, champion is 5, Challenger is 5, and then whatever else is the rest.
Yeah.
What happens to, like, people that are running galleries that are maybe a bit of Belgium, a bit of Switzerland, for example? Like, this is the thing I think is, like, if they are going to split it, or they are going to do something like that, it's almost like sooner rather than later. Because the longer they leave it, the more people it's going to negatively impact. But I don't know, like, it's obviously a hypothetical, but I think it's, like, an interesting topic to discuss. So, like, where do you stand on it? Like, would you split? If you would split, like, how would you split? Like, I think it's just a really interesting conversation point.
Yeah, I think I've always been in the no split camp. Like, I've always been like absolutely not, and for a few reasons. The first reason is, what do you do with? Do you have it like how do you split it, right? So do you have like a stronger teams? So, like, say, like you say, like the step down from champion is like a Challenger Europe or whatever, and then it's like Portugal, Netherlands, maybe Belgium, and a couple of others, the ones we perceive to be the stronger leagues, or they have the higher rank coefficients, etc. And then you have, like, after that, you have another league, which is like people have said Contender Europe, right? So, and then there's a Contender Europe, which has, like, the perceived weaker leagues in the divisions. Now, what do you do with prizes? Do you split them equally so that you can win Challenger cards in Contender as well? Or do you have them separately, like we have a champion prize pool, which obviously is any champion, right? Because if you have it so that you can only win the cards that the SO5 league you're playing in is playing, so like Contender Europe cards can only win Contender Europe cards, you drastically devalue the price of existing Contender Europe cards, right? Ones that were in Challenger that now move to Contender, because they can no longer win Taliches. They can no longer win whoever else, Tadic, Timber, whoever, right? The key cards in Challenger Europe, they can't win them because they can only win the lower rank coefficient teams, and they'll still be able to win good, decent prizes because, because there's still some decent players in those leagues, and Austria might be one, right? And now the Salzburg players are like the pinnacle of contender Europe, but that puts a huge price. It puts a huge ceiling on their price, so you can still play them in global and in U23, etc. But your domestic or regional SO5 league is a lot weaker in the prize pool than it was previously when there was one big Challenge Europe. So the second thing is that it makes your existing outliers in Challenge Europe that stay in Challenge Europe even more powerful. The reason being is that your Timbers and your Tadics, etc., say they stay in Challenge Europe and they can win themselves and again all the best Challenge Europe cards. Or because I'm presuming that the best Challenge Europe cards are from the upper echelon leagues and teams. I don't know if that's a correct presumption, but that's what I'm presuming, and I think it's correct.
Or like the absolute metas from the smaller leagues. So it'll be like your Likoviches and your GKs from Zagreb or Salzburg. But on the rare occasion, like most of them are going to be your top end Dutch.
Yes, exactly, right. Yeah. So the reason that I think Timber and etc. get even more powerful is that they have a reduced pool of cards to play against now. So like now you see in Challenger, like you say, you have so many players to compete against that Mehdi Taremi can go off and score a hat-trick one week, or Dynamo Zagreb can keep a clean sheet one week and stick up ridiculous defensive numbers. But if you restrict it to it just being Netherlands, Portugal, Belgium, Austria, and one other, like when Ajax do hit big, it makes it so much harder to compete with them because you have a limited number of there's limited variance, there's limited numbers of players that you can actually put against them. And so this
would kill the Celtic. It would kill the value of the Celtic cards overnight.
Right. Exactly right.
But with all due respect, Scotland's not getting in. If you were to say one of the top 5 Europe outside of the top 5, it's not like Scotland not getting in there. Like Celtic and Rangers themselves would, but the rest of the league quality is
league as a whole stands. But I think you could well be right. So I think that those have always been my reasons for not splitting it. I think you devalued so many cards, and the ones that are already valuable, you make them more powerful. And therefore, basically, if you're not running those cards, what chance do you actually have? You need to wait for them to have a bad week, which essentially, Timber, etc., has had a bad week this week. Tadic has still put up 80 odd. But you need to wait for them to have a bad week, and that doesn't happen particularly often. And then when they do, you need your players to have done well and capitalize. And I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's pretty difficult, right? And it makes them outliers to a point where I think that is becoming tricky. And lots of people will say, well, Josh, you're just describing the situation we had 6 months or a year ago, etc., and it still worked okay. And that might be the case, but I just think now that with player prices as they are, the main drawback is that you devalue a lot of cards, moving them into a contender situation rather than challenger. So you're now going to ask me, well, how do you do it then? And the answer I have is I don't know, to be honest with you. My opinion has always been you make the prize pool bigger, but I don't know. Is that going to be the case? Maybe when we get new season cards, that will be the case. It looks like that's going to be pretty soon, with obviously the headshots changing for Belgium and Austria. So I'd hope that they are launched soon. That has a positive impact on the prize pool. But if that isn't the case, like if that isn't possible or whatever, I don't really see a fairer way to do it, or like a logistical way that works without killing X cards. And if that's what they're going to do, if they say that we have no choice, we have to split it, the region is getting too large, we feel like user experience is being diminished because of that, then there needs to be a pretty big time lag on this, right? You need to say we're doing this after the World Cup, and you need to announce it now, because then people aren't getting rug pulled by and say these leagues are staying in Challenger, these leagues are going to Contender, because then people have an ample amount of time to readjust their galleries and get out. I wouldn't want it to be like a scoring matrix change. Oh, this is coming in next month, and then you get mass panic throughout the market, because that just doesn't work, does it? But Yeah, I think that would be what I'd say. If they are going to do it, it needs to be set out strategically, and it needs to be given a good lead time so that people can prepare optimally. I still feel like they shouldn't do it, and they should just keep it as one big league. If you'd asked me before this season started, I would have been much stronger on that point. I'd been like, there's no way they should split Challenger. Like, I'm very happy with that as it is. But actually having viewed this week's prize pool, and I presume we're getting similar sort of going forward, and if they do add more leagues, I can sort of see people's opinion, people's point of view now of actually, should it be split? And I think, if there's a clever way to do it that I'm not seeing, then yeah, I'd be all for listening to it at least.
Yeah, the one that I wonder about is we had the DMPs in the pools recently.
Yeah.
And to give the context, I won a Pedri from that. Pedri was a DMP. And when you think of sometimes the quality of cards that you get, the volatility in winning the league. So if you look at the last two midweeks, Sutalo was first prize 1 week.
Right.
The next week was Santi Rodriguez of New York City, who is literally half the price. So you see these wild swings, but then at the same time, we have these really high quality DMP cards that aren't integrated. So I do wonder what's happening with that, because I think it would be great, integrating DMPs really, if you can value them. And basically the issue for me isn't that whether they're DMP or not. It's what is the current value? Is the current value fair when you get it awarded? For example, there's always going to be variance in the pool. But if you finish third and get a card worth 0.01, and someone finishes 17th and gets a card worth 0.7, then you can be annoyed. Whereas I think as the competition increases, they have to really accelerate the process of getting those DMPs into the pool. As I think, or they run more specials with DMPs. If they're not technically ready to do it, they run more specials with DMPs, as they did recently, and they move some of the cards that they're using for special back into general competition. Because if you look at it, the under 23 pool this weekend is missing some major cards, but they've all been given out in specials. So there's obviously a balancing act going on, and I feel that bringing the DMPs does alleviate a lot of those concerns. Because I think I was very much with you at first, because the whole talk of splitting, people have just been saying, oh, they should split Challenger because it's too big now.
Right. Yeah.
And at that time, I was okay, well, but what does it mean to be too big? Because for me, I'm thinking I tried to run it tactically, for example. So I try to correlate a lot of my Challenger gallery and under 23 gallery around Belgium, because I know that these odd weeks where maybe only Belgium and Turkey play, and I'm surefire in a good position to absolutely smash it that week. But a lot of people that don't have the luxury of the gallery size that I do, don't necessarily have the depth, they will look to go for what can I afford? And that might be a goalkeeper and a defender from Belgium, a midfielder from Switzerland, a forward from Denmark. And if that scenario happens, and there's got to be a line drawn somewhere, suddenly a lot of people will be forced to have a second goalkeeper, or they need to sell some of the players that they were running historically in Challenger.
Yep.
So that was always my negative of it. Is people were oh, you just want to not split it because you're winning. And I'm no, I'm thinking of this logically. If it's split, larger galleries will be able to absorb it more, because they'll be oh yeah, you know what? Actually, I have a bench keeper that wasn't making my starting Challenger team, and he can now go into contender, and brilliant, I've got another lineup. But most people don't have that luxury, so they would be then forced to buy more players to actually compete a lineup. I suppose the flip side of that is, the comments around women's football were predominantly fear of adding in complete metas that then would like completely turn the current game dynamic upside down.
Yeah.
So I suppose the question here is like, in those sort of other leagues, are there any teams like that would completely turn it upside down? Like, I don't think Olympiacos is a good team, but they're not like so good that they would completely destroy it. I suppose the question I think about this is like, playing a little bit of Ultimate Champions last season, noticing like how Toulouse completely and utterly walked the second league. Like that's supposed, and then like that, you use your example of Fulham earlier in the Championship, is you might have these scenarios in like if they were to fully license a league like the Championship, and then obviously the Championship is already covered. We've got people like Muric who somehow got a last man tackle yesterday, and that's we won't dive into that because that'll go into a whole other conversation. I was running Harwood Bellis this weekend, but you can't run full teams. You only get people that like the luck of transferring there. The same with China. Like it baffles me why China is covered, because like the quality of the league, I'm always like, if we have China, why don't you have Saudi? Because like Saudi's arguably a stronger league than China. Sure. And you're kind of catching the net of where players go to die in one area and then not in the other. But sorry, I digress. But like, think about a team in the Championship, or say they get the Premiership, and people are rooting for Fulham and Watford to be relegated. Like that, last season, people were like rooting for Watford to be relegated because they thought they'd get Okoye as the Championship goalkeeper.
Sure. Yeah.
Like if they license the Premiership, and you have the Championship is still covered, even if it's not fully licensed, you'll have a scenario where like people are willing players to drop down a division so they can be absolute smashers. And I think it creates an interesting dynamic. But like the other way, that if a Fulham smash, or like, in France, I think like Saint Etienne or Metz this season are probably going to be the two teams that completely and utterly smash it. Yeah. They're only going to get maximum 12 months of being like the absolute metas before they get promoted and then like regress. Yeah. So it's an odd one, because at first I sort of don't know how to feel about that in that scenario where we have a bunch of other, because like you said, that like Sorare have always been very clear with they want to license the top 20 leagues, and the Championship is a top 20 league. Like there's no bones about it. Like the quality of that league compared to some of the others that are currently licensed, like Championship's a much better league than the CSL. Arguably a much better league than the K League. So you are like, you feel like there will be a time where Sorare get that, and then it's like that question of splitting, not splitting. Like I think I'm with you in the not splitting camp, but on the condition that prizes scale accordingly. And when I say scaling accordingly, I don't just mean like adding a really long tail of T3s. You're like, oh, the prizes have gone up to 400 this week, yay! And then you look into it and like 380 of them are T3s. And you're like, but yeah, I think that's sort of where my head is at, is like on that condition of yes, but like, so the prizes scale, not so it's easy to win, but so like people have an incentive to remain competitive. Because like if you're going significantly over 400 and not getting at least a T1, then I think you're like, people are going to get like, they're going to lose interest. So I think that's my condition, like not condition, but that's my consideration around like the what if scenarios of adding a bunch more leagues to Challenger is, does the prizes scale? And like stars, for example, because you like rightfully pointed out, we've got more leagues this week, yet fewer stars. That just doesn't make sense. It's like someone's pressed the random number generator again. But
yeah, I think you make a good point there. I don't think I have the answer, mate, on how they do it fairly. Like I said, especially affecting lower budget users, with like you say, sort of having not cobbled together, but having put together a team to play Challenger that then gets ripped apart in two, and at that point, you don't have either lineup. You don't have a Challenger or a contender lineup, or whatever you want to call the other division. I think again, like that sort of comes down to having a long lead time on the decision if you want to do it. So yeah, I think that like the only answer is if you are going to do it, you need to announce it soon and then say it's not coming into place until after the World Cup, and then until then you need to try and bolster the prize pool to some point where it makes playing Challenger reasonable.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I think like the World Cup is a wonderful like line in the sand
Yeah,
to be like, it's so rare almost want to make a bunch of decisions because like no decision is going to be universally liked by 100% of the user base.
no, yeah,
Like that's always going to be the case. But it does feel like if they do have any other major decisions up their sleeve, like scoring matrix changes, it does feel that it's like, you know what, like we've launched the game. We've learned from what we've done in the last couple of years to get us to the million plus users that we aspire to get to. We feel that we need to do this, this, and this. It's coming in after the World Cup. And like if they announce that like this month, then it does give people like a couple of months to like acknowledge and prepare for that. And then it's a case of like we've got that wonderful scenario where like every league is on break. It comes at the end of a calendar year. Like it is the perfect opportunity to do what they need to do, or if they feel they need to do something, they might not. But it feels like that perfect opportunity to execute change should they so feel that they need to.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Yeah. Well, so here's a question for you then. What league would you like to see added? I mean, I'm heavily biased. I want to see Greece added because my Hwang In-beom has just gone to die at Olympiacos. So I'd quite like a nice challenger midfielder back again.
Yeah, good question. I think I'd really like some of the Scandinavian leagues that play in the summer because you know me, I do not play summer ball, so I would like an excuse to play some summer Sorare. The reason I don't play, as I mentioned on last week's pod, is because I like to be able to follow games when they're live and watch my players come in, etc. And I can't do that with summer football at the minute due to time zones. But yeah, if they brought in like I think Norway play throughout the summer, all of Norway. I think that's the summer league, and I'm sure there's another one in Scandinavia as well. So yeah, I'd be pleased for sure if that was if that was a thing. Yeah, and yeah, I would. That's the league I would like most. I think like one of those Scandinavian leagues that play throughout the summer, or both of them.
I think Scandinavia is nice as well for under 23s because you do tend to see, they do give a couple of the major teams, they really do give opportunities to young players.
Yeah.
Which reminds me, is he still at Ajax? Has he gone back? Because there was some big strong rumors he was going back to Copenhagen.
Yeah, it'd been confirmed to Copenhagen, I believe.
Was it?
Yes. So one to watch there. I think I did put. I did think that the transfer could happen and put a little note in our Discord, didn't I? And said he could be good there. I think his historic scores are okay, but obviously they're from like 18 months ago now, aren't they? I think. Yeah. If you have,
we just need to look at Andreas Dreyer as an example of what happens when someone goes rolling back to Scandinavia.
Don't. He's actually a joke at the minute, isn't he?
Yeah. It's funny because I remember at the time, one of the guys in the Discord won him, and I was like, I don't really like him because his AA game is terrible because of a midfielder card.
Yeah,
which is true, and it's still true in Scandinavia. But he's averaging like 2.5 decisives a game at the moment. So it's like his AA just doesn't really matter at all. It's crazy. Because I think he had a super as well, didn't he? Like that would have been an absolute smasher card now.
Yeah, it was a super. Yeah, I think. Yeah, that's great. And I was like considering buying it, and I was like, oh no, I think 0.6 is too much, which is what he wanted.
Yeah.
It's now like what's his rare's like 1 ETH now. So, yeah, that's good fun. And do you think with like the same thought process we have with Challenger, like obviously I sort of alluded to it initially with like it's almost like I think people have the issue with Challenger big being that the scores required to win in Challenger are very high because there's a vast pool of players to choose from, and therefore there's like more combinations available of players to play, more teams entered, therefore like it's just a higher chance that people score more, like that just with variance that people score higher points. And like I alluded to initially, like we can see it happening in limited now, especially like in champion, where a lot of people run similar teams, but obviously it's not like that there's loads of teams available in limited. It's just that the scarcity element is so relaxed that people can afford to have them initially, and then there's like enough supply available to have them in their lineups. So I don't know, like, do you think that we see broader changes from Sorare, like across the main like regions? Like, do you think we see like the scrap of the All-Star League or Champion League or whatever, and it goes to like a more permanent specialist format, which like requires more tactics and more like patience, or not, like more structure to lineup building? Or do you think they just carry on with this and this is like the way they're set now?
I've not actually ever thought of that before. I feel it would be very difficult for them to like remove the current formats.
Right.
I think they will, like, I like the fact they have been testing with the specialists. I think they will continue testing with the specialists. Like, as a context, I have like absolutely no intention of playing All-Star Limited or like the regular Limited leagues like with any degree of seriousness. But
yeah, sure,
I will target the specialist and the underdog, and have some cards to be able to do that, because it just is like it's just become like an absolute smash fest now. So I think like considering the alternate formats that allow people on a lower budget to play is important. I think you also have to consider like a lot of people have invested to build teams to compete at the highest level in the current format. So that could end up causing significant unnecessary pain to a lot of user base if you just say, oh, by the way, we've canned X division. Right? Which I don't think they would do that. I don't think there's any reason to do that. I think increasing the prevalence of special tournaments is an important way of giving people a stepping stone onto the ladder of whatever region they wish to play for. I suppose the question is like, how do the composition of those regions change? We've talked about for a long, we've talked at length about, Challenger and what Challenger leagues they could have had. Opta also cover Saudi Arabia and Australia. You talked about, and I guess this doesn't actually help with time zones, but one barrier I've heard in the past around not playing Asia is
English
languages.
Yeah,
absolutely. So like, obviously Saudi doesn't resolve that, but Australia could. Saudi is actually a winter league just because of the heat. So it would run in like, Asia, it would give you an Asia option when Japan and Korea aren't playing. The same with Australia, and there would be some overlap. So, what I do wonder is about thinking about the composition of the current leagues and how that adds an extra dimension to the gameplay. Because you think, like, I get quite excited when they add a new league, because it allows you to go out and scout and find the players that, sort of give you the edge and give you the opportunity. Like, I loved it when Austria was added. I was like, brilliant. Like, it was great fun. I can go and like scout some new players. So I think that's an important consideration, is around what they could add, because when you look at it, you sort of say, arguably, why have you added Peru and not Saudi? Like, a lot of people, like, Saudi, the strength of the teams in Saudi now, so they've got some very good players there. Like, it's a very, like, Saudi is incredibly popular. Like, football is incredibly popular there, and they've got a lot of money because a lot of the clubs are owned by various different government entities.
Yep.
So you think about the strength of the league and actually like the product that's on offer. They have some incredible players. Australia is, they've obviously got Melbourne City, who are very well funded. The rest of the league, I don't know, but I definitely put the A League on par with K League. So you could ask the question there of like, if that league is covered, then why is not this one? The one that just baffles me completely is China. Like, China, like, it's not a good league. Like it's really not. Like it was. They tried to make it a good league, and then they got bored, and everyone ran out of money, and they stopped funding the teams, and now it's like really a terrible league. Yet it's still covered. But the thing that I find really interesting about it, and I don't know whether this is just me being a bit of a geek and like thinking of all the possible scenarios, is I think about Sorare's revenue, and I think about like people I naturally put the brakes on. Like this is kind of a joke now, isn't it? Really, like people are like, "Oh no, players going to go to Saudi," and you look at what happened with like Theo Bongonda's price. The moment there was a sniff of him going to the UAE, which for reference is not in Saudi, but half of the Sorare user base thought it was, and were very very quick to dump him. If these leagues were covered from an Opta, like they're covered from an Opta standpoint. Like Sorare could score them if they wanted to, if they paid to upgrade the package. The amount of players that go there each season, how does Sorare's revenue indirectly increase with people more comfortable to buy players, knowing that there's one less destination that they could go and be unscored? Like it's a really like left field way of thinking about it. But like if you were to think, if like I would almost feel from Sorare's perspective, tactically covering Saudi, Greece. I'm trying to think where else. Like, Saudi and Greece are probably the two that really like take the most people each season and go like, oh no. Suddenly, everyone in the Sorare community has a little bit more confidence that if they invest in a player, they will be able to utilize them, even in the scenario of a transfer. So in that sense, I'm really pro more leagues being added because of that element of if you're making an investment, like obviously if an injury happens, then that's just really, really unlucky. But to have a player like transfer and you basically got the lottery of like if they go here it's okay, if they go there it's not okay. If Sorare minimize that, then suddenly I think their revenue increases, like indirectly through auctions, because people like, the Raysol goalkeeper, like it was widely known that the Raysol goalkeeper was going to Saudi, but Sorare was still auctioning him as long as he was still a Raysol player. But his auction price completely fell off the cliff. But if like Saudi was covered, then, his auction price probably remains the same, like while he's still a Raysol player, because okay, he's just gone to another league. I could still use him in global if I wanted to. So I think like that's like a really like you've not just got the competitive element to this of like what does it do to the level of competition, but also like what does it do to your gallery in terms of giving you almost like a soft level of security that you won't like spend 700 euros on a player and then like he gets a summer transfer to somewhat uncovered. Because I think if you were to logically go through the countries that are covered and the countries that are not, like why Peru and China and not Sweden and Greece, for example? Like if you were to actually rank them in terms of like any coefficient of like what are the world's best leagues, some of the ones that are covered, like Colombia's covered. I don't think we have any licensed teams there, but it's in the Opta package. Like it's just wild. Like it basically feels like Sorare had like signed an Opta package, and Opta went, "Yeah, China's in there." Like, but you know what I mean? Like it feels like there needs to be some real thought around like what is covered and what isn't covered, because you've got this sort of odd lottery of like a player could be linked to 3 clubs, and one's like they become amazing, 2 of them's like okay, and then the other one's like, oh well, they're just going to be like useless now. So I think like when I think about the league coverage, I think about it in those 2 ways of increased competition, but then also insurance. I know it sounds weird to think about it that way, but I think it's important.
Yeah, and I wonder if Sorare take more of a view on that if and when they turn on taking a percentage of the secondary market.
Yes, I agree.
Like if they're taking a cut of the secondary market, I was looking at Bongonda's price graph, as you mentioned, like he goes from 0.35 to 0.05. And obviously if Sorare are taking a cut of this transaction, and that's for his rare, if they're taking a cut of these transactions, then they're going to they're going to care more about it, aren't they? It's all right auctioning one card a week, but if you suddenly got, how many transactions are here? 20, 30?
Yeah.
If you suddenly got 30 transactions that go through in a day and it goes down by, what, I don't even know how much that is, 90%. Yeah, 90%. Then that is hurting Sorare, directly. How much extra have they got to pay for these additional leagues? If they're charging the secondary market, I'd say that it would be a net gain for them, basically, to just
absolutely.
have as many leagues covered as possible.
I agree with you. But then again, it comes back to that point of like, creating that sort of structure around it. Like, what is that structure? And I feel like when we talk about like major changes, that transaction fee is another one. Like I feel the interesting thing here is like introducing the transaction fee and explaining like what happens as a result of it. Like if Sorare were to say, you know what, we're adding in a transaction fee on the secondary market, it's like 0.5% of your transaction, but with the revenue we generate from that, we are going to cover X, Y, and Z league to help protect your investment. We're also going to increase prize pools by Y. Like that's like a really reasonable, valid trade-off, and the company is helping to ensure their long-term stability. Like I would literally have zero issue with adding in a secondary fee, like literally none. But I think like there will be some friction within the wider community. But I think like if you are explaining that, then it really helps. And honestly, like I would absolutely love to have like minimized like chances of my players' value going to zero. Like, and that's where like Saudi comes in. I just think it's a really interesting point, and I think like you've really summarized it well in saying like that World Cup is that opportunity to change a couple of
things or change things. Yeah,
absolutely. So anyway, we're going to get a bunch of comments on the back of this being like, is Saudi being covered, mate? What do you know? Saudi, as far as I know, is not being covered. I think I have like 2 players that are in Saudi, so if it does get covered, I would be happy. But let's go for Greece. If anyone at Sorare's licensed team is listening to this, please give us Greece and Scandinavia.
I just had one of my players, Petar Filipovic, who was at Lask last year, go to AEL Limassol today. I don't even know where they are. There you go. So yeah, can we have Cyprus?
You're reaching to get Cyprus out anytime soon. Hang on, I'm just going to go and check the Opta feeds. Yeah, no, Cyprus isn't in there.
Oh dear. What a shame.
Oddly, Poland is though.
That's another good one.
Yeah,
wouldn't mind Poland.
Legia Warsaw.
Yeah. Another Challenger League there. Look.
Wow, exactly. I'm just having a look. So yeah, the ones. So Australia. I like just looking at a couple. Australia, Poland, Saudi, Greece, Norway, Sweden, Slovakia. Oddly, Ecuador. They've now covered.
Yeah.
If anyone from the licensing team or Sorare's commercial team is listening, like we've just mapped out.
Get on it, lads.
Soften the blow of that secondary market fee with a couple of extra licenses. And I was saying that, like, could you imagine, like, if they cover Saudi, Pavel makes bank. You just need to like just charge a secondary fee on Pavel and cover Saudi.
Yeah, it would be mental, to be fair. I wonder how many cards he has.
I've lost track.
To be honest, it's going to take me too long. My computer will not load his gallery fast enough to check in a reasonable time frame.
Okay, all right. I will. I'll let you jump in. I'm going to go and check how many Saudi cards Pavel has.
I'm going to say, if we include limiteds, I reckon he has 200. Actually, maybe I think probably more. I reckon he has like 300 Saudi cards. I'm going to say, which is like more than most people's galleries, which just seems. Yeah, maybe that's too many. I don't actually know how. Why can't I look at managers on Sorare data? By the way, can you look at managers?
He's only got 200.
Only. Okay, nice one.
Only. He's got a ton of Adam Maher. He was a
Has
recent
he? Yeah, he
died of
was a
death in
recent death
Saudi.
for sure.
Alex
And
Valera as well. He was one of the ones. He was in Peru, wasn't he? He was a great one in Peru, and then he went to Saudi this summer.
yes, another one that I know he has lots of, and he has the unique, I think, is Konstantos Manolas from Olympiakos now.
Oh, yeah, Manolis would be good actually, wouldn't he? Oh, here you go. Here's the race goalkeeper. I forgot his name earlier. Kim Sung-kyu. He
Right.
was the one.
Yes. I remember him.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like there are quite a few leagues that they could cover, and yeah, I just wonder like what else they would do, and if they would add anything anytime soon, because there's always been that like statement, and I think like whenever there's like the question of are you going to cover the Premier League, it's always responded to with we are striving to add the top 20 leagues. I wonder how many Sorare managers have actually looked at like what those top 20 leagues are and understood like which like could feasibly be covered. Because it's like SofaScore, for example. Like SofaScore use the Opta feeds, so you can go and have a look and you can see like what is covered. So not only are those sort of countries that we talked about earlier covered, but then you've got the second leagues from all the major ones as well. So there's a bunch of leagues that Sorare could add overnight if they wanted to. Like Opta has the data.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like what you made sense that like you made a really good point there of like it makes infinitely more commercial sense for them if they've got a secondary fee, because they do have to pay for it, and Opta is not cheap. Like Opta charge a fortune for a fairly substandard product, but they do charge a fortune. So it's probably absolutely. It is probably looked at like from a Sorare perspective. It's incrementally adding leagues. Every league they add is going to charge them something. So it probably looks as like a cost center at the moment with regards to if we add a league without having a licensed club, whereas if there is a secondary market fee, it suddenly changes that. Because like if they were to say we're covering Saudi, like there are tons of players that prices that some of them could even 10x overnight. Like what does Adam Maher do? Like a guy who was like decent in Holland, what does he do in Saudi? Who was it? Medran as well. The guy that was decent in MLS went gone. Like there's a like there would be a bunch of players that like people would pile into very quickly in that scenario.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, there we go. A podcast full of speculation.
Absolute speculation.
And theory. For two guys that are normally hot on the numbers, this has been like close to foil hat territory, hasn't it? Like just straight.
Yeah, hasn't it? I think it's. I hope it's been a good listen, though. I think to summarize, like I don't see a decent way for them to split Challenge Europe that makes sense for the platform currently. If they are going to do it, and there is some way that I don't see, there needs to be like a long lead time on what they want to do. And I think it is interesting to speculate over the future of limited divisions in terms of like what Sorare are going to do with like your All-Star and your Challenger and your Champion regions. Like I could see limited becoming much more of like a specialist only region because like soon you are going to need 520 points to like be winning the division in limited, which just because of the amount of cards that will be available, which just seems absolutely ludicrous. So I don't know. Like I think it's interesting to speculate over where they go with that and how that, if they do add more specialists / underdogs / special leagues, which Nicholas hinted on the Nellis podcast, I think that was going to happen. Like what that does to existing prize pools, maybe not even just at a limited level, but if they're doing more of these tournaments for Rare and Super Rare, etc., what does that do to your traditional prize pools? Because there's only a finite number of prizes, isn't there? So yeah, I think podcast full of speculation, but I think it's interesting to speculate and think about what might happen.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I agree with you. I think it's important to consider the what if scenarios and be prepared if they do happen. But yeah, I hope everyone has taken something from today, even if it was just a sneak preview of what Opta do cover. So thank you ever so much for tuning in, and see you next time.